Yo, what is good, guys? Today is Tuesday, August 18th, 2026. I'll be going over the one trade that I took today. It was a win, and it's a very, very, very discretional trade. So we are going to go into that, right? How I kind of am building into my discretion, right? As I've been saying the past couple of videos, I'm trying to become a lot more discretionary with trading. That way I can, increase my RR, my trade frequency, all those things. Just more so trading draw on liquidity wise. So I'll be going over how I found my draw on liquidity, all the good things. And first of all, thank you guys for 4,700 subs. Absolutely insane. Starting now closing on 5K, which would be insane. If you're not already, join the Discord, right? I do giveaways here every single week. Currently doing a giveaway for 5 Lucid accounts. Use code RESETLUCID, doing 3 Apex accounts and then 1 Tradeify account this week. So tap in there if you're not already. Open a ticket if you use my code. Appreciate all of y'all that do. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. Going into 9:30. Starting on our high time frame, right? So on our high time frame, where are we currently sitting at? Well, you can see that we are currently distributing down from this high, getting what? Well, a massive distribution and a bunch of unfilled gaps, right? With these unfilled gaps comes what? Well, it comes rebalances. So initially, right, if I'm looking to take some sort of continuation towards this weekly gap, right, because if we are distributing through all of these bullish gaps, disrespecting them, I can expect what? Well, I can expect some sort of higher time frame liquidity pool to get taken in the form of what? Well, we have this unfilled weekly gap that I'm sure that we're going to go and tap before then continuing our high time frame trend, right? So how are we going to get to this weekly gap? Well, zooming into the 1 hour. Right, let me turn this back on. Zooming into the 1 hour, we have number one, this singular 1 hour gap that was traded into and now distributed away from. Therefore, this current leg from this high to this low is what's going to give us our conditions, right? Inside of this little accumulation, we have a accumulation, manipulation at the highs into that 1 hour, and now distribution lower, opening up a new 30-minute fair value gap on this leg. This 30-minute fair value gap is going to be our if this then that statement, right? Either way, we are going to want to see this 30-minute gap get hit, right? If we're going to be bearish, we want to trade higher into this 30-minute gap before then taking our trade lower, continuing that trend to this weekly low. However, if we're going to be bullish, then we would want to see us inverse this 30-minute gap to then trade to a higher liquidity pool source up here, whether that be this 4 hour that's going to open at 10 o'clock, whether it's just, resweeping this 1 hour gap, this 1 hour intermediate term high and not having to go and hit a 4 hour higher. Either way, this 30-minute is what's going to be our confirmation for our if this then that. On top of that, looking over at ES, right? ES has that same thing where we have this low time frame accumulation area. However, ES is already traded into that weekly gap. Therefore, I'm kind of looking at this low as that correlated weekly gap low, because this is actually the unmitigated part of it. Therefore, if we were going to be bullish on our high time frame, you'd like to see the reversal happen from down here rather than just from right here, right? So either way, ES also has this unmitigated 4 hour gap, right? It is already formed, so I'd like to see this 4 hour gap get hit for any possible shorts, right? So initially, I am short term bullish to my conditions. With that being said, right, looking over at NQ once again, looking at the 4 hour, what do we notice? Well, we can notice that we have this 4 hour gap that we're still currently trading inside of, and this is what's going to, I believe, offer me my rebalance towards some sort of condition to then continue us lower, right? The way that the market moves is liquidity to imbalances and imbalances to liquidity. So if we're currently inside this imbalance that has swept out liquidity, then I can expect some sort of condition to get returned to before then, eventually getting another setup up here to then continue our high time frame trend lower, right? So it's kind of just working your way back from what you want to see happen at your overall DOL and then going back and back and back until you actually get to your entry trigger. So with that being said, right, at market open, what ends up happening? Let me go next candle. Right here, right, we have 9:30 open, and it does what? Well, 9:30 opens lower into this 4 hour gap, right? From that point, we're then presented with what? We're presented with a massive rejection wick, a 30-point wick, and only a 3-point body, right? So the wick is 10 times bigger. But notice what this wick actually does, right? This wick trades into that 4 hour gap as well as sweeping out all of these lows to the left of it, closing with the body back inside of the range, right? From that point, you then have what? Well, you now have at the highs low resistance liquidity leading up to your high time frame condition that should get hit either way. Because if we're going to be bullish from here, right, what should we do? Well, we should just obviously continue to run. However, if we're going to be bearish overall on our high time frame, we should also continue to hit this 30-minute to then send prices lower. So either way, this should now be an agreed upon draw on liquidity. Right, so now incorporate your time, right? What does time actually do? What does a high time frame candle do? Well, it generates liquidity, right, before it then manipulates in one direction, and then you get your distribution, right? So the way that I am viewing this currently is 9:30 opens and does what? Well, 9:30 trades lower. However, yes, it manipulates, but on our high time frame, because I'm overall bearish on the day, I am looking at this as generating liquidity, right, with our 15-minute swings to the left of us across the curve, all the way over there. I'm looking at this as generating liquidity with those before now expecting the manipulation of this candle into our conditions, right? So we have this agreed upon DOL. We have time generating liquidity at the lows. So I'm expecting this to be the manipulation into this 30-minute gap before we can then actually distribute, right? So I'm essentially trading the manipulation leg of this 9:30 PO3. So from that point, right, what was my actual entry trigger? Well, it was simply just the candle close. I really didn't have an entry trigger today, and that is the very discretional part of this, right? Actually understanding what the draw on liquidity is, super simple. However, getting into this trade, there's not a 15-second or anything like that. All I was seeing was these rejection wicks being printed, and I'm like, okay, well, I have a very good understanding of liquidity, and I have a very good draw on liquidity right now that is also aligned with my time, right? So all that I am looking for here is just somehow to get into the trade. And without any inversion for me to actually take, I was like, you know what? Let me just go ahead and get in this trade anyways, based off of the reaction to this low and printing that massive rejection wick, turtle souping the lows to the left of us, right? That's really all that I needed here. And then in the next, couple candles, I believe 2 more candles, I did end up hitting TP. My TP was just here. I kind of just tossed it up there. Was trying to adjust my stop loss, set all my orders across all my accounts. So this is where my TP ended up being at 42, just a little bit above this 30-minute intermediate high, right? I was expecting us to, if we're going to manipulate into here, we're probably going to get a little bit more than just a singular point. So on top of that, we also still had this 4-hour unfilled gap left on ES, so I wasn't really worried about me missing this entire. I wasn't aiming for this one, obviously, just taking my lower hanging fruit, which is this 30-minute condition, right? Because this is not guaranteed unless this 30-minute gets inversed, which in this scenario we actually never ended up doing that, and we did trade lower back to this 930 wick, right? From this point, this trade right here, it's a little hard to justify why it would have lost. In my opinion, I do just believe that it's because ES doesn't really have a great area to distribute off of, right? You're kind of just relying on this SMT with the 4-hour gap, so you're lacking your true manipulation, as well as over on NQ you are lacking any low time frame targets. You just have the singular swing low. So would have liked to see a little bit more low resistance on the low time frame, or at least ES have that true manipulation, just to have a higher win rate on this type of setup where we sweep out the lows, sweep out the highs, and then get an inversion. But going back to my trade, right, essentially just trading the manipulation leg. Either way, this 30 minutes should have been guaranteed, so I took my piece of the pie, which was this guaranteed move right here at market open. And yeah, so if you guys did enjoy, like, comment, sub, all the good things. Appreciate you guys all for watching. It genuinely means the world to me. And yeah, if you're not already, come to the Discord. I'm doing 8 account giveaways this week, so it's absolutely insane. Tap in if you're not. Use code reset lucid trade fire apex to be entered. And then yeah, wish you guys the best of the day. Tell somebody you love them. Do something productive. Don't gamble. And I'll see y'all later. Bye.